start right now, if that's okay with all of you. I just want, first of all, to thank the attendees for joining. I know you actually passing beyond the kind of tiredness that we have of the Zoom meetings that have been taking over our life for the last 18 months. I hope you're all getting in line, already partly vaccinated, and all this will be behind us. We will continue those webinars, by the way, because I think we actually really have a very good rhythm of trying to have a webinar series on a monthly basis on extractive industries and sustainable development, inclusive development. So that specific webinar is part of this series. As you know, some of you know, we also have a country per country webinar analysis. We just did Ecuador. We'll be looking at Peru, which is a very interesting country right now, especially in the middle of the elections. I see Mariana I know you've been looking at those elections. So we'll have a specific webinar on the 13th of May. You can already put it on your agenda, looking at the situation in Peru and the potential developments of the mining sector in that country. But here we're really focusing on best practices or elements of how the mining sector integrates into projects of development and territorial development, but also including development in different countries. We have covered in the past on previous webinars the relationship with indigenous communities. We've covered issues of local content. We've covered issues of community consent. All this always trying to get a mix of university, academics, experts, practitioner, sometimes mining companies or financiers. So right now, I just want first to mention my three guests. I mean, that was very rude of me not to start with this, but I wanted to thank Cathryn MacCallum from Sazani Associates for joining us. Daniela Serra Maggi from the University of Pontificia Universidade de Valparaiso. I don't know why the Brazilian with a G came in the middle. I've been speaking Portuguese this morning, that's why. And Mariana Fregonese from Great Panther Mining are joining me to discuss the question of social performance. So that's a huge topic. I have absolutely no arrogance or pretension of covering social performance and the extractive sector in 1 hour. But the idea that we had here is try to have an introductory webinar, such as the one that we did on local content probably a month ago. It was an introductory webinar on local content. By the way, all our transcripts or recordings are free, so just reach out to me if you want to have them. I'm happy to pass them along. Here we're going to be discussing about social performance. From first maybe a conceptual analysis. So we're going to be talking about sustainable livelihood first with Cathryn. Then we'll talk about impact assessment studies and how to do it correctly and with the long-term vision in mind with Daniela. And we'll see a perspective from the mining company of Great Panthers with their operations in Brazil, Mexico, Peru, and therefore trying to have comprehensive views on this topic. Maybe just turning to you first, Cathryn, and we'll cover in the second round of question experience in Ethiopia, in Tanzania on key projects. You made an amazing event last Tuesday on looking at how to bridge with different experts. Thank you for inviting me at that time and trying to get an inclusive vision of social performance from extractive companies. Can you maybe just walk us through, maybe just help me set the stage first of all? Thank you for this help, and maybe transition to the question of sustainable livelihood, which is an interesting metrics, or actually let's say approach to the question of social performance that can help therefore afterwards get a good metrics or get follow-up of how to assess and improve the social license to operate of key projects.
Okay, thank you, Remy. I think really social performance for me, and I think for a lot of people that work in the sector, is really the sum of all engagements, and whatever shape or form that engagement takes, between companies and between the communities that host them, between the governments that host them, between the businesses and the potential services in the area. So how people engage really starts with how people relate to each other. How people relate to each other then sort of draws on what different people perceive about each other. And I think the norm in the mining sector for a very, very long time has been to look at the communities around a project, whether it be exploration level or moving into sort of development and sort of in planning level sort of stages, and to look at what are the problems in the community. They look at literacy levels, they look at health levels, and they focus on what a community doesn't have. And so from the very beginning, a project's relationship with the communities around is always looking at the problems, and by focusing on the problems from the outset, you intrinsically end up with some sort of parent-child relationship, and then you get dependency, and then you get conflict, and there's a very sort of common story there that has been seen all over the world, across Latin America, across African countries, across Asia, across Europe. So what we do is we sort of, right at the beginning, we turn that relationship on its head, and we say, instead of looking at what a community needs, or what a community hasn't got, or what their problems are, we look at what a community has. What assets does a community have? What are the strengths in this community? What skills do local people have? What natural resources do they have or have access to? What financial capital do they have or have access to? What infrastructure do they have or have access to? And also, what social capital do they have or have access to in terms of social assets? And in looking at this, we draw on something which is called the Sustainable Livelihoods Framework, which is really a pentagon of these different assets. But it just means you're looking at a community then from a perspective of what they have instead of what they haven't got. And in doing this, you can then focus on their ability to influence or access decision-making processes. And you can sort of look at where your organization can fit into this area's development as a partner in the development of the region, as opposed to coming in as a project that is very quickly perceived to be a provider of all things, and then we get that same old story. So that's really what we're doing. So it's really just turning that from that initial understanding of a community on its head, and looking at what a community has, what assets do they have, and seeing these assets as capital assets, as something that is of value and that can be built on and extended.
Maybe as a quick follow-up to this, and I always appreciate talking to you because I know we have the same vision of trying to turn from the top down to bottom up. So basically, you get what is existing, you engage very early with communities, you try to see how to fit, use methodologies from the cross-sectoral collaboration to the theory of change elements to actually build sustainable bonds with community actors. In a long-term scenario, actually doesn't take a lot of money. It takes a completely different approach. And that's I really appreciate this. I know we're going to be talking just afterwards on the social impact studies, but maybe just to help me transition toward Daniela on this. When you take the sustainable livelihood approach, how can you fit into the reporting of that are necessary in the either ESG world, from the financing to the elements of self-reporting and others. So how do you include this into elements of reporting on impact assessment?
Well, all impact assessments start with a baseline. Yeah. So what we say in terms of that baseline, and we're working with a project in Ethiopia at the moment, a gold exploration project, and what we're doing with them is we are working with them to help them to understand the natural resources that the community depends on. And whether you look at this from an ecosystem services perspective, or look at how the provisioning and the cultural ecosystem services tie in with the social baseline, I mean, it's gathering that information, it's gathering data which enables you to have an understanding of your impact on a community, understanding the strengths of a community, and how, say, a gold exploration project will impact, or a gold mining project would impact on that. That is just as valid as understanding what the problems in that community are. Mm-hmm. So, when you look at your resources report, if you're a geologist, you don't look at what's missing, you look at what's there.
Absolutely.
And so, why do we only keep that mentality for underground? Above ground, we should look for what's there as well, not for what the gaps are. We look for what is there and what can be built on and supported. And it actually ends up being a lot more cost efficient, because you are working with skills and extending them, rather than building a school, building a hospital. You're building a building, but you're not adding anything to the community. You're creating buildings without looking at what skills there are that could be used to develop educational projects that support and build on that are relevant or to the local area or to the local context. Yeah. So it's a different way of looking at it.
I could bridge that to a series of past conversation in this series that I'm thinking of, and then I'll turn to Daniela. Daniela has great experience in Chile specifically, and looking at how to define those social impact assessment. But all that you're seeing obviously is that the focus that we've seen from mining companies, that might be something I bring out to your attention, Mariana, has been, and understandably so, because of a series of structural forces on risk assessment, or on the other elements, which was trying to look at capacities, and therefore a lot of communication on, we're going to bring you infrastructure, we're going to, sometimes I've heard mining executives saying we're going to pull you out of poverty, which is probably the worst thing to start saying when you arrive to your community, but I've heard it. And the idea was, with the hospitals and schools and so on, but without actually engaging as a mean of equal communication rights, at least on trying to understand what are the existing elements. Yes, there's maybe a green tourism, there might be coffee production that might be at risk because of a mining project. Let's see how we can grow together. Let's try to provide and so on. Oh yeah, I was about to tell you.
Just building on that quickly, Remy. I mean, the project we're working on in Ethiopia, we're working. There's an exploration stage, and we're working with them much earlier than traditional sort of mining projects, pulling consultants. And they're a Norwegian company, and they're called Akobo Minerals, and what they are pushing is the importance of, I suppose, the environment of the area, and we're working with them to look at how rehabilitation of areas sort of in and around the mine that have been damaged by artisanal mining can be rehabilitated, and through this rehabilitation carbon credits can be generated, which in turn generate income for the community to manage themselves for their own development. You're bringing
me back to my United Nations Environmental Program years of carbon calculation and impact on forestation. I promise to come back to that case, because that's actually my second question. I don't want to lose my second question to you. And looking at Ethiopia and Tanzania in different cases, the one in Zanzibar that you have also, but maybe turning to Daniela, we've talked, likely for the moment of impact assessment studies. I mean, and you actually do a series of them, and we talked about this. Maybe can I ask you to help me also set the stage in terms of what should be included into the good impact assessment studies? Maybe a little scholar, but that's actually very interesting to just try to make sure that we're all on the same line here.
Yes, of course. First of all, thank you, Remy, for the invitation, and for all the people that is watching this webinar. Well, first of all, I have to give some of the context. In Chile, social impact assessments, they are within environmental impact assessments as a baseline, as a human baseline that is very basic. So we, like social scientists, consultants, we have to be kind of missionaries trying to convince people that they should put more information, because social or human baseline can have or collect much more information that will be very like the potential information to build trust and good relationships in the future. The problem is that, like Cathryn was like telling like an ideal situation where she's working now in an exploration project. So kind of a best practice to recommend will be, of course, that SIAs should be done in early stages of project, but usually, at least in Chile and in the most of the developing countries, they are done when all the key decisions are already made. Well, the entire project is designed. They are not even done in the planning stage, not even in exploration stage. And if they will be done at that point in the early stages, will be way more useful in the future. So that's why a good practice will be to do it, to try to do it in early stages, and also to try to take it out from environmental impacts assessment, because it's a small chapter within a huge report in environmental, to assess environmental issues, and that is set up in a way that you only have to put certain information. So if you add crucial information, key information, like Cathryn was mentioning, like assets, priorities, visions of the territory, I mean, that information that will not be hard to get will be very useful to then in the future build trust. The other thing, yeah, go.
And please keep your other thought just afterwards. But I think you mentioned two very important things. First of all, the interest of being proactive on these things, and not only submitting it when it's requested and so on. I mean, we work with a series of mining companies in Latin America, and we keep telling them at good faith that it's better to submit some information on the baseline on what are your priorities in terms of social strategies that actually helps you pass along a lot of the red tape and the time when you actually are being evaluated by the Ministry of Mines in different countries. I have key countries in mind when I say this. I don't want to say the names, but it also really show the commitment to those issues and also the building trust from the very beginning. So a lot of companies that prefer staying on the sofa waiting for the letter to arrive in the mail, and there's already a series of demands for the communities to be doing this, and therefore they can't if they're more proactive and show good faith at the beginning at a very minimum cost compared to if you wait, you can actually provide a lot of information that will help you jump in front of the line for a lot of the process at the ministerial level. And that's something that you mentioned that was very important. The second thing that I wanted to bring was you made a comment of when it's too late, it's after the design of the mine. We had a conversation on Tuesday. I mean, you were not in my work group, but Cathryn probably knows the company with a representative of a mining company that was saying a lot of the information that we want to get from the communities are actually their opinions sometimes on different scenarios for the mine structure, for mining decisions. And we need to have communication. We also communicate very hard scientific data, which is very, very complex. But if you don't do this at this moment, then of course you don't have the communities as a partner of at least being informed of the good faith of the mining company, even if they don't have a decision right on those. I mean, there's different scope of participation levels there that can actually be applied, but you actually will gain the trust from the communities. And that's where I'm turning back maybe to, you mentioned trust, and that was kind of my transition, but you also had a second point, Daniela, and then I love to get the feedback from the mining company, Mariana. I'm coming just after, but yes, Daniela, please, if you
yeah,
give me a second one, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, the other thing is that in Chile, we still, unfortunately, we have short participation standards. So consultation processes are working very poorly still. So prior consent doesn't exist. It is suggested to companies that they should carry out early participation, but because it's not mandatory, it's not compulsory to do it, usually they don't do it. And also consultants have to try to convince them of the benefits of doing that. But because usually that is not done, then imagine that when you are, as a social scientist, as a consultant conducting a SIA, it's the first time that the community see people coming from the company or representing the company. So whatever you do, how you talk, how you approach to them, you have to be very careful. You have to do it in their own terms, because you, even though it's not meant to be like that, the SIA, you are already building trust and kind of putting the seeds of how is going to be the relationship if the project gets the approval, the environmental approval. I mean, you already put in the seeds. So Absolutely. If you don't include, for instance, traditional ecological knowledge, local ecological knowledge, don't tell them information that they are asking you, because sometimes they send you the companies and they say, don't tell them anything about the project, just ask them. I mean, it's impossible to do that. You are already building a relationship. So what you do or you don't do at that stage, that is the first stage, the most of the time that people approach to the community in an active way, and even to being asking them things. So you are very intrusive, like trying to get information for them in a short time. You have to be very careful. So that's why it's very important to do it in their own terms. And it's very important to have done prior to that, even though the company wouldn't ask you to do that sometimes, to have a good stakeholder mapping, because to who you're going to approach, for instance, to ask for assets. Sometimes the first groups that approach to the consultant are people that have their own interests, that they don't represent the most of the people in the territory. And if you didn't conduct a mapping, a stakeholder mapping in the beginning, you'll be kind of choosing random people, and that sometimes won't be the right people to talk to. No, so that will be another best practice to kind of recommend.
No, absolutely. That's interesting. I've seen, Mariana nodding and laughing and having reactions of it kind of being in line. I actually, just to make some arguments, obviously, when you look at the lifetime of a project where, exploration is not where you actually generate funds. So, developing some budget for community relations when we interact with companies at different stage of the project. So that might be one of the first question that we'll have for you, Mariana. Maybe, how do you integrate, since you actually have, projects in Mexico, you have a great project in Brazil, had done the due diligence on that project for another buyer. I'm just not happy that you bought it, because I wanted to continue work on that project, but and you have a project exploration stage in Peru. The question here is, how do you integrate this into your processes as a company? Obviously, it's harder to get some funds up front to generate the kind of studies at the exploration level without knowing exactly the geological capacities or your key dedication and investment level from your corporate team. How do you integrate those questions of social performance not only in the social performance committee of Great Mining Panther, which I'm sure is amazing, but also as a transversal topic, with CFO, with others, or I'm mentioning the CFO, that could be anyone else, but the CFO is obviously very strategic here, and generating the funds to be able to do those work.
Look, I think the answer to that question adds a little bit of everything that we have been discussing until now. I think, first of all, mining companies have now, probably some more than others, other understanding the why early engagement is much more cost effective and allows you to manage risk in a much better, easier way, right? So when you start seeing also that from the investment community, from the financial community, you have requests for disclosure on the E, and like Daniela was saying, like all the permits, you have like 90% is environmental data, and in some cases like Chile and Peru, you have a little bit of social, and in some other countries you don't even have that, right? So I think companies are starting to see that this is no longer an optional, and either because you went through a crisis or a conflict in an operation, or you're trying to acquire something or a project that already has a context, a social context. There's a conflict. There's something at the layers of the social side that doesn't allow for a development or just to build a mine. So I think as probably the mining company representative here, I think we have a lot to learn yet. But I think that over the last 10 years, this social performance side of the business has changed for the good a lot, right? And it doesn't matter if you have like the funds, how you get the funds. You don't need a lot of money, right? You just need to have a systematic approach, and just to, like Daniela was mentioning, doing a stakeholder mapping exercise is not too expensive, right? Having the right people on the ground is not too expensive. This is just a training session. We had, like, as a small producer, we're still looking for projects. And sometimes we do start some drilling. I remember you talked about the Guadalupe project in, I don't remember where it was, but it was something that we started drilling and it didn't work. But at the same time, we started drilling, and I don't know if Monica's been on this call, but we engaged Monica and her team to actually start building that database, building that engagement, training the geologists, because it's probably not only the consultants that actually start compiling this data, is the geologists, right? The exploration team is probably the first one on that side. And how we train and how we explain the team, we are setting expectations the moment we set foot on the ground, right? So it's very important, even if you're a consultant or employee of the company, that we are all clear in what is it that we're trying to achieve. We're setting clear expectations. I think Fabiola here from
Yeah,
Peru.
I saw the question from Fabiola. I was about to address it in the follow-up, but please start taking. And by the way, I encourage anyone to ask questions in the Q&A. I see them, and I will ask them at the same time if we can. Yes.
It's how do you communicate, right? And how do you build trust? You build trust by communicating and being exactly as clear as you can. Can we do it better? Most likely. Like in a lot of cases, we go back and do a postmortem and say, well, we could have done that better, or we could have approached this in a different way. But that is the part of learning, right? This is not an exact science, and each community is different. Even in the same countries, we have 2 operations in Mexico. Even in the same mine, we have very different communities, right? So there's no one recipe that you can say, okay, this is the best toolkit and go and apply it. You have to look at the external stakeholder groups, but you also have the internal side of the company, which is actually combined makes things very interesting.
Yeah, but you see, I mean, that's for me, it's really a question of perspective. I'm trying to take both the question on the Q&A and transition into to Cathryn. Obviously, I mean, we look at communication, and we'll do, by the way, a specific webinar on communication, because communication is a key element of sustainability, especially the approach to communication. There's plenty of things that could be said, from the basic communication to the platforms that we generate that help, having a two-way streets in terms of communication. We'll also do something on governmental affairs and water. I'm just putting a little out there for the future in case people are interested to look at this. But looking at what you're talking about communication, the problem is how you position the mine into the future of the territory. And obviously the approach to communication that we've seen in many companies, which is basically giving information about the project, or trying to give some showcasing the rightful and the good attempts from mining companies to do some CSR project and other, in order also to convince investors that they're doing a lot of work. What convinces investors, I mean, we talk with investors, especially when we're talking about Peru right now, investors want to know what's happening in Peru, but the issue is much more at the local level when you look at this, and your capacity to have grasps the concerns of your communities. So the communication, if you really want it to be effective, it's about allowing your communities to communicate to your broad base and communicate good things, and through their eyes of being able to say, look, I have this issue, but you actually answer to it after 2-3 days. There's a committee on this and so on, and that is what will allow you to have your social license to operate. This all comes to the idea of having the mining company as one actor and not the overbearing actor in a territory, and therefore let others be able to express themselves about whether it is about eggplant culture or tomatoes or coffee or actually local business there, unleashing this power through communication and being able, and that's why you were kind of mentioning, Cathryn, in the case of Ethiopia, but you can also mention, your project that you have in Zanzibar, for example, of how to engage those communities, but being kind of the tutor. We've seen it in a webinar on local content, of having investment through local content actually serves as a sector and allow for the diversification, the economic diversification of the territory. Same thing for social performance. It's a social diversification and allowing for well-being in a series of metrics with the mining companies as one of the actors, but engaging on an equal ground level with demands from the communities or concerns. Basically, that was the longest sentence ever, I think. So I'm just going to stop it here. I'm going to call the World Guinness Record book and ask you, Cathryn, what is your thoughts on this?
My thoughts on this are, it's very easy as a person with experience and development, or somebody that comes from I suppose the global north and is then working in the global south, or some people call third world, to come in and to want to make people's lives better. Yeah. And to see, I can do this for you, I can do this for you, I can do this for you. Yet, as I was saying earlier, that doesn't work. That approach only works as long as you are priming it, funding it, coercing people to be involved in it through whatever means. Sorry, I've been surrounded by dogs now. What we've done and what we did in Zanzibar is we worked with a 4-year sort of climate change adaptation project. And with this climate change adaptation project, we developed a model by which we worked with communities and we supported them to develop their vision for their community, looking at 5, sort of 10 years. And then we did something called backward mapping. We worked with them, okay, to reach this vision, what can we do? What needs to change? What needs to change? What needs to change? And sort of identifying sort of the small changes that they felt needed to happen for their communities to be as they would like to see them. And Zanzibar's a tropical island, and so as a tropical island, it is vulnerable to climate change, and it has been hit hard by climate change. People sort of growing their crops now have encroachment from the ocean, sort of from the Indian Ocean, so their crops don't grow because they get inundated with seawater. They have unexplained weather events. They had their first cyclone in over 100 years, sort of last week. So there are lots and lots of extreme weather events, which when you're on a small island are much bigger than if you're on a bigger landmass. You cannot escape, you're there. So we've been working with the communities to identify what they would like their communities to look like, and for them to identify what and where they require technical support, where they have the skills, which comes back to the asset-based approach again, where they have the skills and the assets, where they can sort of do things, what support they need, whether it be technical, financial, what have you. And we've ended up working with the ministry and working with the communities and the government at large to increase understanding, increase awareness, and to affect positive change. By building on people's strengths. This model, we're in the process of taking it sort of from a tropical island to southern Ethiopia at the moment with the project I mentioned earlier, and again doing something similar and working with the communities that exist in and around this gold exploration project to work with them for them to develop their sustainable vision. It's an area that has artisanal mining, it's an area that has agriculture, it's an area that has quite a lot of water.
Yep.
And has heavy rains, has rainy seasons. It has a very mixed population. It's also close to the Sudanese border and the South Sudanese border, and that's rather volatile at the moment. So we've got all sorts of really complex issues all going on in and around. So we're planning to be working with this community, with the different stakeholders, following Daniela's sort of, recommendation. We're carrying out a thorough stakeholder mapping beforehand, and then engaging with the different stakeholder groups to really collate their collective vision, and then to look at how that can be supported, and how at the moment they plant trees. Mostly through the churches, but things like Epiphany, they will identify an area where they will actually plant trees as part of their Epiphany celebration. So we're looking, that's one area which we'll be looking sort of how can we sort of work with the churches in the area and the mosques in the area, and build on activities that they're already doing that have some environmental benefit. How can these be built on and extended, working with them, so that tree planting not only is for Epiphany, but tree planting can be for carbon capture as well, and through this then generating income through helping them to develop a payment for the ecosystem services that they are actually developing. So
I'll take it from here, and thank you very much for sharing the experience. And I know the region that you're mentioning in Ethiopia, and we have a similar project in Mozambique, so with the same concerns on all levels. I completely understand, the kind of step-by-step approach. We have two very interesting questions, from Luana Gomez in a mining company in Brazil, Augusto Cauti, which maybe know as a former vice minister of mine in Peru, and those questions are interesting, and especially the question of raising expectations. Obviously, if you also work with with communities and you try to have them, what is their future in 10 years, they potentially can see, yes, the possibility, which could be interesting in terms of showing how, let's say, mining investment through participation in better, say, government tool, or better capacity, or better skill building set So showing also the adding up from the mining company in terms of supporting the project in that case. But yes, there is the risk indeed of increasing expectation. We've seen in many cases, especially when commodities were extremely high. Like you think about the case of La Colosa in Colombia, for example, and raise expectations on the local level. So how do you actually manage those expectations? That's very important. There's different methodologies to this. Sorry if I can just take two minutes on this. First, it's very important that it's actually done with a third party, and a third party which is not only, let's say, one person representing the company, but actually with a team of 2 or 3 people in terms of bridging a more comprehensive approach to it, but also taking the responsibility of it, in a sense that there's a study that is being made, but it's not done by an employee of the mining company. Therefore, there's an element of being able to play a little bit with the buffer. That's a small detail. A bigger element is the kind of methodology that you actually implement. And Cathryn, touched on a few of those. We've been selected by the Devonshire Initiative to give a series of courses on collaboration and building this. So I'm just going to go through basically my slides as a professor for last week. But basically, you start with an asset mapping structure. So, what is there? Then you turn towards a collaboration mapping. So basically, based on this asset mapping, what are the capacities to develop, some sound collaboration and go beyond just 1+1, okay? And you look at the structure of both, you have public positions. I'm doing a triangle, by the way, sorry. You have public position, they're the result of interest and they're reasons of values, of norms, of visions. This is what you need to understand to be able to create some sustainable link with communities and understand that you're here with a real interest in the long run without trying to build expectation. Usually those, and when we talk about why do you see your community, it's not about, well, I want to have 5 hospitals and 2, football fields or whichever. No, it's more, question about, and we're talking at the anthropological level or here or sociological level in terms of, your key concerns in terms of security, your key concerns about, livelihood, your key concerns about, health, yes, in a certain extent, but how can you communicate about this and how can you actually see the processes towards the point that you want to be, which is an element of sustainable livelihood. What I'm saying is very inclusive. It's not that much quantified, and it is quantified to a certain extent, but I know usually, mining companies want to have hard rock numbers on those elements, but they actually offer you the possibilities then to elect for 2 different scenarios. Either a community-led development where you support the community, but they have the responsibility for reaching the goals. Therefore, they are responsible for meeting those expectations. Or another one, which is a much more cross-sectoral collaboration, where if strongly engage the help of a broker or facilitator organization, Sazani is one, we're one, and whichever. So, but these allows you then to work with those communities with the right institutional framework to communicate with them of where are the failures and others. So yes, you raise expectations because you show them where they could be arriving, but you need to set a positive image also with the negative externalities they could have on the environment and others, but you engage with the communities from the get-go as actors. And if I can just as a footnote, if you want to go back to the webinar that we did, I feel like in my classroom right now. If you want to go back to the webinar that we did on indigenous communities, we looked at the case of project reconciliation in Alberta, British Columbia, which is a pipeline. But there's a 51% trust in the hands of the indigenous communities, where there's a series there of decision making where they're very much involved. This is a good case scenario. You have to ramp up to it with different. Obviously, you're not going to start with engaging an indigenous community that doesn't know much about mining and there's lack of socialization. There's a 51 owner of a trust. No, but the idea is to try to engage them as equal partners step by step so that you grow as different actors into the territory. I'm just going to turn to Daniela because you were.
Can I say something?
It's all yours,
I just
Daniela.
want to add something.
Without saying word.
Yeah, very short because to go next to Mariana. One thing that you have to always keep in mind when you are working with human beings, with communities, is, and considering the asset framework that Cathryn was describing, you have to also be flexible and keep updating that information. And that has to be also with expectations, because assets can change over the time. So sometimes when you start to work with the community, with the local community, and then suddenly they are dynamics. I mean, human beings are dynamics, and sometimes companies think, oh, we already got this agrees, and this is what they want, and then these were their assets, and then out of the blue, they change, and they have new assets, so on. So you need to keep updating and monitoring that information over and over, all through the cycle of the mining project until the end, because totally can change by the end. Imagine the environmental assets. I mean, natural resources could be different because climate change. And then what they have in the past, 10 years later, when the mine is about to close, they don't have it anymore. So you have to keep also updating them, because expectations, the people could say, oh, but you said that we were going to do that. Yeah, well, but situation has changed. I mean, the environment has changed, or you have learned new things and new skills. So you always have to be flexible about that. And the other thing is, one of the assets that for anthropologists is very important is to learn about social structures and dynamic within. Because also many things you can predict what is going to happen, knowing how are the dynamics between. So mapping stakeholders is not just to tell you about how many different groups are and their vision and their interests. Also the dynamic between them is very important.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
only those two elements to keep in
I'm
mind.
I'm going to turn to Mariana. I saw her even take notes. So I mean, I know she has an answer, but just maybe to build on this. And when we say about informing, and that's one of the limitations, and maybe explain the question that was asked about lack of communication, of rejection of some mining projects in Peru, for example. It's not about just, having your, have I achieved my objectives, kind of Borealis framework inside the mining companies, where the mining operative just, fits up of what he has done in his work for the mining company. No, we're talking about a different approach to this, which is communicating to the communities. And there are, now, thanks to the development of new platform, there are ways to have 24/7 communication with communities when they actually want to, be connected to those networks. I mean, we have one. I don't want to do a sales pitch here, but that's a way to actually be able to engage them thoroughly. Because when you actually have just a meeting every 3 months, as good as you are, then you come back to your organization, you develop your commitment, you work on this, but how do you relay the information on a regular basis with the community actors? You come back 3 months later without having engaged with them, and especially now with COVID. I mean, I'm looking at Mariana, who's stuck in Vancouver, lovely city, but obviously traveling out of Vancouver for the last few months has been complex. I'm lucky. I'm traveling next week. I'm going back still every 2 weeks to Latin America and other jurisdictions. But how do you work with this, therefore? And maybe if you want to, tie this up, I know you have to go at 55. So if you want to give a last comment, that'd be wonderful, Mariana.
Yes. So I think the communication part is extremely important. And of the communication part, I think we really need to focus on the listening part. I think Cathryn mentioned that sometimes we go with pre-assumptions or solutions that we think they are the best, and we really need to listen and have a conversation and just continue building that relationship, right? How do you do it? How do you do it? Like, I think for me as a practitioner, the last year, I think we started with this crazy world at site levels in February, March. It's amazing how resilient communities are. It's amazing how the social teams at sites had to adapt. For example, we renewed a surface agreement rights in Peru with one of our communities of the project there. And last a week ago, we had a community assembly where that you have to have, by law, everybody in the same room technically. But we needed to have 93 people actually going through the process in the public and in the community assembly. So we had to switch to change and actually have 50 in an open room, very like social distancing. And then we have people on Zoom and on WhatsApp, right? So when you think about it and you actually put the communication need or value as a tool, as a management tool, an engagement tool, you find a way, right? I never thought we would be doing a community assembly over WhatsApp, right? A year ago. Those, that you have to be present, you have to sign the minutes, the acts, the agreement. Well, guess what? COVID, right? Yeah. So now you have to have, and we had to brainstorm. Are we doing this over radio? We're gonna have to have a radio channel for the community, all to have access to this information that is actually impacting their common land and their common rights. So I think is key. And also you need to, like we were saying, you need to find a way of presenting your project or your process. And it may be tricky too, right? Because not always you're gonna start with an exploration site. And in our case, for example, for Tucano in Brazil, or the project in Peru, there were previous operators with different engagement methods, with different ways of working. So now you have to present yourself and say, okay, this is Great Panther now, and this is how we would like to engage with you. We need to listen what you think, right? Because sometimes it's very different. It's very different. But like, I think very content and clear communication helps to say, okay, the previous operator of Tucano did this in a way, and now Great Panther wants to do it in different ways. I think that communities also are very open and understand. Even in Peru, we have neighbors in mining companies between us. We have very different ways of working, and they know too, right? Like, what does Great Panther do and what the other companies may or may not do.
Perfect. No, very, very interesting. And there's actually an interesting question from Matt Jackson. I don't know if you saw it, which is basically, what do you do when there's actually, you know, with the best community engagement methods, it's impossible to reach an agreement with communities? When do you know that you should back off? How do you engage it? I have already my ideas on this. I'm not going to ask Mariana, because obviously Mariana and Great Panther are doing, you know, a perfect job. They don't want to back off to any other properties. So she would not know. But I do have answers to this, Cathryn and maybe Daniela, if you want to start with maybe that question and give some concluding thoughts on this webinar, so we actually finish on time.
Matt,
who's going?
No, you.
Go, Cathryn,
okay.
Go.
I think ultimately, if you don't have community consent, you don't have a project. I think you can keep pushing, and we've got some very good examples in Europe. There's a lithium project in Caceres in Spain, and the community do not want it. Caceres town is a World Heritage Site, UNESCO World Heritage Site. This lithium deposit is in a mountain just outside. The community do not want this project, and the project is pushing ahead and pushing ahead. It's not going to happen, and because the community do not want it. So I think that you need to listen. You know, my grandmother always used to say, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and you have to use what God gave you, you know. And if you don't listen, and people are saying no, and you're saying but what if, and they're going no, the answer should be no. And I think the mining sector of the 21st century can no longer railroad in and compulsory, well, they can, but they shouldn't, since they can in some jurisdictions, but they shouldn't railroad and be able sort of to force their agendas, because it comes back and it bites. And so I think if the community says no, I think you just need to listen.
Daniela, do you want to, you know, and by the way, I'm going to steal, I hope it's not copyrighted. I'm going to steal that, you know, 2 ears, 1 mouth quote for future conversations.
Oh, it's copyrighted to my grandmother.
Yeah, I'm going to use it for my kids personally, but I don't. But anyway, just Daniela, if you want to.
I'm sure many other grandmothers.
Some comments.
No,
yeah,
just telling about in Chile. We have been talking about that we should kind of do a mapping of the entire country territory and kind of set up very clear for companies in what areas is possible or not possible to kind of build any kind of project, mining, energy, or whatever. Because there are, special circumstances, because, I don't know, cultural or heritage, or just because the people in that area, they are really attached to the land for any way, or past experience that in some, or because they are saturated, because they are just already too polluted, that companies should know in advance. Maybe because there was a plan of doing that, but never has been done by the Ministry of Bienes Nacionales, National Goods, that they were going to do that to prevent companies to try to set up a project in a place that where they already know there are a lot of elements that will tell you way in advance that it's not possible to conduct to build or to conduct or go on with any kind of project of that, not extractive project, at least.
And
so that is an idea that will be a good idea for different countries, because we'll save a lot of time and money to companies. And it's something that our government can do.
I'll come back to this, Chile as a conclusion, and specifically, I wanted to, raise a few answers to Matt on this question. But I know Mariana has to go, so I'm sure she wants to maybe have a final words or just excuse herself. But I'll conclude on this webinar after. Mariana, do you want to say a few words before you leave?
No, I just going to Matt's question,
yeah.
And I 100% agree with Cathryn. Some companies may have a mandate and will go for a project knowing that they think they may change the social situation, but sometimes when communities say no, you may have different approaches. I think we had one project also in Mexico where the community we did the due diligence. We worked with very experts on that, and eventually we reached, the community got together and they decided that they did not want mining, right? So I think for us as a junior producer, that we didn't, it was clear, okay, this is when we have to go. If there are early warnings, I don't know. I think we're mining companies, right? We want to keep mining. So you probably will go different ways and trying to have and present your project, trying to explain what you want to do, the impact and the potential collaboration and the potential benefits that may bring. But some communities will, like Cathryn said, say no, right? And that's fine. And to Daniela's point, that communities change, that in 10 years may have a switch, right? You have new generations. I think in our communications with communities, you have the actors, and then you have new actors, right? The young people that actually want to have a say in their future too. And the kid that was, I don't know, 10 years old in 2010, today wants a job and wants to be more involved in the environmental protection of the communities. So I think sometimes they may say no, and then may say yes later, or it's always a solid no. I think that's part also in the collaboration and just understanding that you want to burn money and say, oh, I'll keep doing it. You're not going to be able to. I think people today with technology and social media, they found a very good way to express their voices and actually to organize themselves to say no when they feel they have to say that.
Yeah, absolutely, and maybe just to build on this, I agreed with you. Three answers. First of all, on community consent, I mean, this is needed, and there's, I wouldn't say the time and age where you could actually get investment from different investors that just do desk research on community consent in your jurisdiction. This is past, and that's a good thing actually. So they actually can have really an understanding of the situation on the ground. I would refer maybe to the webinar we did on community consent with Columbia University. I'm happy to send it to anyone that reaches out to me on this one. On the question of where do you know that it's time to go? Because my take on this is always, and I say that for sometimes, there's often some anti-mining people that join my webinar. I got very good friends in indigenous communities, me, I got very good friends at green parties and others. And I tell them, most 95% of mining executives believe that the mine is in the best interest of the territory. Whether they're right or wrong is different, but they are good intention. And sometimes that might be linked to that question. I don't know the specific project that we're talking about here. Happy to talk further. It is a question of how can I make them understand that it is for their best interest? And sometimes they are opposed to the mining company for reasons that are not the right ones. So I'm just going into that very specific case. I've seen it several times. What I say usually is, first of all, you need to be able to get rid of the negative impact from outside. So a lot of the opposition are sometimes motivated by political interest from the capital cities, by green NGOs that are very good, well-intentioned sometimes, but have no clue what's really happening in French Guyana or in Peru or in other places. And so the objective is really to be able to have a regular, maybe a small session of 2 or 3 months of a small dedicated social media of communication with that team to be able to exchange, with that community to be able to exchange, but limited to that specific environment. Basically, it's like if you're a surgeon, you want to take the final try at a wound. First of all, you clean it up. okay, then you actually look at the best case scenario where you could get for a limited amount of time and just assess, let's say a highly, in terms of new technology, if it's a platform, or if it's methodologies made with, very highly credentialed people that have good relation with the community, not too much good relationship. Actually, if it's a foreigner, it's even better in some cases. Let's be very clear, okay? And just try to engage with them, and in a very short frame, 3 months, decide whether yes or no. You gave it your last try. You really went for the best. You cleared it up from externalities that would have impacted the communication and the lack of trust. And it all goes through trust. And that's obviously, a word that was, I think mentioned by all the panelists here. It's a question of showing dedication to this, building trust, seeing the newcomers in terms of communities. The youth usually are supporting more the project when they are well explained. And you can then take a decision of whether just to keep it, not developing for the moment, try to sell it, or really engage into it if you were able to get a clean playing slate. But that is worth doing. I mean, if I were, I take a lot of metaphor, but if I had a very health issue and I wanted to take a decision whether or not to go for an operation or not, just consult, put it your best for 2 or 3 months, clear with other externalities, and get an operation, like an intervention, and take a decision right after. And I think, in those cases, those are, mining projects where there are a lot of antagonisms, sometimes for bad reasons, for history, for, you mentioned, mine legacy, which is a key one. I mean, we have a white paper, I need to re-edit it, but you'll get it very soon on mining risk in Africa and mining risk in Latin America, where mine legacy is a key element of opposition from communities. But there are specific methodologies for all of those, risk or limitation. Happy to engage, and I really recommend Daniela and Cathryn in the areas of expertise also for this. Good to know that you're not on my recommendation towards you. That's good. We all agree there. That's perfect. I just we just at 11:59. I wanted to thank all of you for joining. As always, we'll get a transcript for this webinar. We can circulate it. Just reach out to us. We'll give it to you. As I said, there's an objective here, which is both academic in terms of best practices and, sharing them with the mining sector and liaising you with a lot of the Embellie advisory friends and experts. So I'm definitely putting Daniela, Cathryn into this, and in terms of companies, Mariana. I'm looking forward to having next conversations in the next webinar. And for you, Cathryn, Daniela, Mariana, thank you again. And you know how to reach me on WhatsApp or over a coffee over the weekend. That there's no problem. Thank you very much to all of you.